At the end of last year, a character called Nick 30 went viral across British social media. He represents a 30-year-old worker, stressed, overworked and struggling to pay his bills amid the rising cost of living. The meme resonated because it touched a nerve. Wages feel stagnant, costs just keep rising, and there's a growing sense that the burden of funding public spending is falling unevenly, that the young are paying for the old. But how accurate is that picture? Is the British economy actually broken? Is the system really penalising the young to fund the old? And what does all of this mean for the country's future? In this video, we're going to break it all down, separating perceptions from reality, and finally answering the question, is Britain broken? Let's begin. £48,000. That's how much the UK government spends per household on public services every single year. Per person, that works out to roughly £20,000. Now, the median full-time salary of a worker in Britain is around £37,000, which means more than half of the average worker's taxable income is being spent by the government just to keep things running. And to make it worse, that number has grown considerably in the last decade, which is surprising because the overwhelming perception across Britain is that public services are actually getting worse. Now, when you look at this table, what concerns you the most? The rising household spending or low wage growth? Median wages have grown by roughly 40% in 10 years, which sounds pretty good until you realise that in real terms, and adjusted for inflation, that's only about a 10% increase. But what I find more alarming is how much money is being spent. In 2026, the UK government confirmed it would spend approximately £1.37 trillion on public goods and services, but it was only going to bring in £1.24 trillion from tax receipts. That's a deficit of £133 billion. That shortfall in money has to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is you. Now, on paper, the effective tax rate on the average earner has actually come down in the last few years, mainly because employee national insurance contributions fell while employer contributions went up. Politicians sell this as a win for the average worker. It's not even close, because what's actually happening is something called fiscal drag. Tax bands haven't moved in 5 years despite higher and persistent levels of inflation. The personal allowance is still £12,570. The higher rate threshold of 40% still begins once you earn more than £50,200. These numbers were set when inflation was low. Now that prices have surged, more people are being dragged into higher tax brackets without earning a single penny more in real terms. Not to mention that if you were a worker with a young family about to surpass £100,000 in annual income, then you are about to lose 30 hours of free childcare, a significant benefit many families rely on and a benefit worth more than the additional income one might receive. Is anyone else in the UK absolutely sick of paternalism? The state genuinely thinks it knows how to spend your money better than you do. 47% top rate, frozen threshold, sin taxes, sugar taxes, fuel duty, stealth taxes everywhere. Then you look at how they actually spend it and it's HS2, £37 billion test and trace, and a welfare bill that never goes down. The nanny state isn't working, it's just expensive. Yeah, welcome to Britain. The government always thinks they know how to do things better than you do and then fail utterly, then say they've got a better idea, then fail at that completely and utterly. It's just the way things work here. What are our governments spending our hard-earned taxes on? As it sure as hell is not being spent on the UK, the country is turning into a third world hovel. You only have to look around to see the money has not been spent on this country for many years. Where's it going? Yeah, public infrastructure is terrible, potholes everywhere, the NHS falling apart. I think she might be right. And it doesn't stop at income tax. The Conservatives raised corporation tax from 19 to 25%, and they slashed the capital gains tax-free allowance from £12,300 to just £3,000. So if you're someone trying to use your own money, your own risk capital to build something, that's a massive disincentive. Then Labour came in and just went further. Capital gains tax jumped from 10 to 18% on the lower band and from 20 to 24% on the higher band. To put that in real terms, if you built a small business and sold it for £50,000 profit, you used to keep £45,000 after tax. Now you'd keep $41,000. Now that might not seem that dramatic, but when you combine it with the allowance being slashed from $12,000 to $3,000, it changes the calculation for anyone thinking about whether it's worth taking the risk in the first place. Dividend taxes also went up by 2%. Inheritance tax thresholds were frozen until 2030, VAT on private schools began to exist, air passenger duties increased, and the list just goes on. Now, the point of this is that in the last 5 years, both parties have raised taxes significantly. The Conservatives did it to cover their COVID spending, Labour did it because they wanted to spend even more as soon as they got into power, and in both cases, it's the working population having to pick up the bill. Okay, so where is all of this money actually going? At a high level, social spending, welfare, and healthcare. The stuff you'd expect. But when you dig into the details, that's when it gets a bit interesting and frustrating. Let's start with pensions. The triple lock guarantees that the state pension rises each year by whichever is highest: inflation, average earnings, or 2.5%. On the surface, that sounds pretty reasonable. We should want our older population to retire with dignity and security. But here's what's striking. Compare it to what young people get. Students are lumbered with loan debt that accrues interest at whichever is highest, CPI or RPI. So students get the worst rate, pensioners get the best rate. One group is guaranteed to fall behind, the other is guaranteed to keep up or get ahead. Now, of the 13 million people receiving the state pension, about 1.4 million households are on pension credit, meaning they genuinely need the money to survive. A third of people in this country don't have a single penny saved in a private pension at all. So yes, the pension does matter and it is a good safety net. But 2 million pensioners already earn at least £35,000 a year from other sources, like a job. So for them, $12,000 a year from the state on top isn't a lifeline, it's just a bonus. And yes, before anyone says, well, boomers can just sell their houses, it's not quite as simple as that. For instance, there was an article that went viral recently about a woman in her 70s who has been trying to sell her house since November 2024 and just can't. People online were quick to call her greedy, assuming she was sitting on a gold mine. In reality, she bought the house in 2004 for £430,000. After inflation and fees, she hadn't made a single penny. Not every retiree is rich. Some genuinely need the help. Pensioners aren't the only ballooning cost. Total universal credit claimants have surged to more than 8 million people. And within that, 3.5 million people are now claiming for health-related reasons alone, more than double what it was just a few years ago. Part of that growth is existing claimants being migrated from older benefit systems onto universal credit. But even stripping them out, the underlying trend is staggering. So why is the number growing so fast? Part of it is rising mental health diagnosis. Part of it is long COVID. Part of it is an aging workforce with more chronic conditions. And part of it is that NHS waiting lists are so long that people who could work are stuck waiting for months for treatment that could get them back on their feet. The system is creating its own demand. Now, most of these people probably do need help. The system does exist for a good reason. But when the numbers are growing this fast, you sort of have to ask whether the level of scrutiny is anywhere close to where it should be. Because this doesn't seem right. And then you get to the stories that make your head spin. The Motability scheme, designed to help disabled people get around, was handing out brand new cars with insurance paid to claimants whose qualifying conditions include gambling addictions and generalized anxiety. And the scheme is open to anyone living in the UK regardless of their citizenship, so you can just enter the country, be able to live here for work and claim benefits from the beginning. Brilliant. Left-wing government raises taxes on workers to pay for delusional promises, same as it ever was? Yeah. And more broadly, without getting into the weeds and making this a political video, immigration has added to the spending pressure too. Now look, this isn't about singling anyone out, it's a basic economic principle. If a country doesn't put limits on who it lets in, if it doesn't filter for people who are young, healthy, and economically productive, then it should expect to see hospital wait times increase, roads get more congested, school places are harder to find, and welfare costs climb. That's not an opinion, it's literal arithmetic. Now, what I find probably as frustrating as how the money is being spent is what it hasn't been spent on. For decades, spending has grown and grown, yet almost none of it was directed at one thing Britain desperately needs: cheap energy. Britain is one of the most expensive energy markets in the developed world. We closed our coal mines, we restricted drilling in the North Sea, and we pursued a policy of replacing fossil fuels with renewables before the renewables were ready. And the result is a country that doesn't generate enough of its own energy and is completely exposed to global shocks. And the numbers are genuinely shocking, no pun intended. UK electricity prices for industrial users are around 25 pence per kilowatt hour. In France, where they invested in nuclear, it's about half that. In the US, it's a quarter. British businesses are paying 4 times what their American counterparts pay just to keep their lights on. You cannot build a competitive economy on that foundation. You just simply can't. The war in Ukraine sent energy prices through the roof. Now the conflict in Iran is doing it again, and every time Britain finds itself at the mercy of events it just can't control because it dismantled the infrastructure that would have given it a buffer. As a result of all of this, the IMF now projects the UK will grow at just 0.8% this year, down from 1.3% before the Iran conflict began. That's the biggest downgrade of any G7 economy, and it's directly tied to energy exposure. And this isn't just about household bills. Higher energy prices are why OpenAI halted construction of their data center in the UK. Foreign investment worth billions gone. Manufacturing businesses operating on thin margins are being wiped out by energy volatility. Britain has been hemorrhaging competitiveness for years, and energy is at the heart of it. The reason for all of it is political short-termism. Watch this clip from Nick Clegg, the former Deputy Prime Minister, talking about nuclear energy investment in 2010.
By the most optimistic scenarios from the government itself, there's no way they're going to have new nuclear come on stream until about 2021, 2022. So it's just not even an answer.
Oh, it's just so painful with hindsight, but just even then everyone knew it was the right thing to do. I remember the debates around nuclear energy and everybody knew it was an investment worth making, yet still to this day it's not anything anyone's working on in this country. It's ludicrous. This clown was supposed to be the embodiment of sensible centrism. Could have locked in long bonds for this, by the way. Yeah, fair point. Makes his decision even more stupid. Even at the time this seemed clearly idiotic. Agreed. Stupid people have been running our country for too long. Yep, I mean, it's pretty evident by this point in my opinion. Nick Clegg, one of the UK's most reliable idiots. You can always count on Clegg to be running in the wrong direction. It's kind of impressive really. He's basically like Kramer, you just inverse whatever he does. If Nick Clegg thinks something's sensible, you should avoid it. If he thinks something's really a bad idea, you should definitely go and do it. This kind of thinking has led to 2 outcomes. The first is inflation. What I love about data sometimes is that it tells a story in chapters, and Britain has had quite a few of them in the last decade. You can pick those chapters out just looking at this chart. Post-Brexit uncertainty pushing inflation up, the pandemic flatlining spending because people couldn't go out, then the explosion, 11% inflation in 2022 that tore through household budgets across the country. Then it started falling, and then we're here where inflation is beginning to rise thanks to the Iran war. The 11% spike was partly the result of overspending on COVID programs like furlough, but mostly because of the war in Ukraine and the energy shock that followed. And the mechanism is straightforward. The government pumped billions into people's pockets through furlough, while there was simultaneously less stuff to buy because supply chains had collapsed. More money was chasing fewer goods, prices go up, and that's inflation. Now, further inflation is expected as the Iran conflict pushes oil and gas prices higher again. Before the war, there was an expectation that the Bank of England would keep cutting the base rate. That idea is now essentially dead. And what does this all mean in practice? The costs will just keep rising. People have less money, and the government has to step in with more support for those hit hardest, which just eats further into that £133 billion deficit we talked about at the start. The second consequence of all of this is unemployment. When OpenAI pulls a data center, that's jobs gone. When a manufacturer can't afford their energy bill, that's a factory closed. When capital gains tax and dividend tax and employer national insurance all go up at once, businesses on thin margins disappear as a result. In Britain, the unemployment rate has climbed to 4.9%, up from 4.4% a year ago. That's 206,000 more people out of work. And for young people, it's even worse. Youth unemployment is now nearly 16%. Job vacancies have fallen to their lowest level since 2021. The labour market is softening, and the Iran conflict hasn't even fully hit yet. Britain isn't uncompetitive, it's just making itself less competitive year after year, policy by policy. It's harder to attract capital when the entire system is set against people willing to take risks, and that translates to less job opportunities for everyone. Is Nick 30 right to feel the way he does? Yes, he is. The state has mismanaged itself for quite some time. Consecutive governments, Conservative and Labour, have stared down serious structural problems and flinched. Instead of making difficult decisions, they've taken the easier route, handed out more, taxed more, and let the younger generation figure out how to pay for it. Debt to GDP is at its highest peacetime level in over 60 years. Talented people are leaving the country, and Britain keeps doing the opposite of what a sensible country would do, spending on the wrong things, taxing the people who create growth, and ignoring the investments that would actually fix the problem. But the solution to Nick's problem isn't complicated, it just requires Britain to be honest with itself. That means acknowledging that not every pensioner earning £35,000 a year needs a triple lock state pension, that a welfare system with 3.5 million health related claimants and growing probably isn't checking who's actually qualifying, that blocking nuclear energy for 15 years and then complaining about energy prices is the definition of hurting yourself, and that taxing entrepreneurs, investors and small businesses into the ground is not a growth strategy and isn't going to increase tax revenue. For too long, Britain has lost focus. It doesn't know what it wants to be, and that lack of direction is why it keeps falling behind. Not just the US, but its European neighbours too. Britain can still punch above its weight, but only if it cuts the waste, invests in what actually matters, and lets its people build again. So, what would you do? How would you fix the country? Let me know in the comment section below. I'll see you next week for another video. Bye for now.